Next up, we have Jameson Williams, the wide receiver out of Alabama, who is a very fascinating player to evaluate, right? As you know, if you guys have watched any of my other videos, you'll know this is one of the highest grades I've given anybody so far this year, 85.54. That would put him overall fifth on my big board of the 80 or so guys that I've scouted to this point. But frankly, for those who are unfamiliar, Williams tore his ACL in the season finale national championship game against Georgia. So in that regard, there's a massive red flag on this evaluation, right? We haven't seen him play a game since. We haven't seen him run a rep since. We haven't seen, personally for me, as somebody who does this at this level, like, there are no doctors that you could just get information from, right? You'd have to be an NFL team and have a medical staff look into his X-rays and MRIs and all that fun stuff. But at this level, acting like I know how he's recovering or how the surgery went, etc., would just be silly. So we're kind of gonna take that grade, 85.54. And not throw it out the window, but use it as a baseline for what we ultimately hope he comes back to, right? After all of his rehab and recovery and whatnot, this is where I think him at his peak of this past season, this is where I think he could have been in terms of my draft grade. So instead of going through category by category like I generally do in terms of my individual grades, we're just going to read off some of my notes, positives and negatives. What did I think was impressive? What did I think was something that he was I don't want to say bad at, because there really wasn't a lot, but something that he wasn't necessarily great at and could use some improvement, or maybe it's just a fact of the way he plays the game. So first and foremost, in terms of the positives, great raw speed. That, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure that one out. He assuredly would have ran a 4.3 something at the NFL Combine had he run, and you certainly see that speed as, one thing that I wrote right here was deep threat to the highest of the levels. Like, it just felt like just about every play, he inevitably was going to be open deep on his streaks and vertical routes. It was fascinating. There was one play, I wish I remembered what game it was. I believe it was Cincinnati, but they're literally bracketing him in. They have a cornerback at the line of scrimmage pressing up on him. Might have been Texas A&M now that I think about it, but regardless, cornerback pressing up on him at the line of scrimmage, and then they are bracketing him with a safety over top. Literally no chance that he beats them deep, right? Next thing you know, 60 yards later, he's in the end zone. And, was 2 yards ahead of everybody. Just left him in the dust. And it's like, well, how the heck did he get there? And it's a combination of, in my opinion, that incredible speed and acceleration, but also some really impressive route running. And I gave him a great route running grade. Thought that was one of his best traits in terms of not only the ability to just quickly get in and out of his breaks and cuts, but also be able to play the mind games, the chess games of it, right? And I was just talking about this with Garrett Wilson in one of the previous videos that I recorded, but Jameson, you see it in just about everything he does in terms of he's trying to make the cornerback think he's running something that he's not, right? Whether it's with his feet, with his tempo, with his eyes, no matter what it is, Williams is trying to get you either off balance and break the route off and leave you in the dust, or he's trying to get you to flip your hips and then cut it back up underneath into your blind spot away from you, right? Like, just very nuanced, in my opinion, was Williams. And unlike a lot of guys with his athletic profile, he did a great job working the intermediate area of the field, right? Like, a lot of these guys that are quote unquote burners, they are going to catch their bubble screens and then they're going to catch their streaks. Well, Jameson did a really impressive job just finding openings, whether it was man or zone, in that sort of intermediate 10 to 20, 25 yard range, just whether it was ins, posts, curls, even just whatever it was, he was able to, in some way, shape, or form, confuse the DBs enough to get open, or just out athlete them, essentially, because there was a lot of that going on, trust me. In terms of some of the other notes, good agility and elusiveness after the catch as a rack threat. Maybe not necessarily the greatest we've ever seen, but when he catches the ball, he's already moving fast, and he just picks it up even more, puts it into a second gear. And in that regard, he's probably going to beat you with his speed more than he is his agility necessarily. But either way, he's a tough guy to get pursuit angles on and a tough guy to bring down, because he isn't necessarily shying away from contact either, which is one of the negatives we'll get into in a second, with him being just over 6'1", 179 pounds. Maybe you'd want to see him take less hits, especially now post-injury, but that was something that I noted here as well. Another thing was great body control on the lateral plane, right? So opposed to being one of those guys that's going to climb the ladder and make these high point grabs, Williams was much more impressive at, say, a toe tap grab along the sidelines, or laying out and making a diving catch, just in the middle of the field, out of nowhere, 15 yards downfield. You have him full extension scooping a ball that's inches away from hitting the turf. It was very, very impressive from my perspective. And then the last thing I have here was just more of a general note. It's just he attracts so much attention, which opened the field for so many other guys on that Alabama offense. And I didn't watch any of their other receivers, at least I haven't yet to this point. Maybe I will after the draft, because I know there's Slade Bolden, right? Michi, etc., etc. I think Jameson and his speed really helped out Brian Robinson to an extent. That's a guy who will get a video here at some point, because you couldn't really stack the box when he's lined up out wide. As I said, you almost had to bracket him in, and he was still beating that on a consistent basis. So very impressive in a significant number of areas. In terms of the negatives, really quickly, obviously the first one is the ACL injury. I wrote that's a massive red flag, and like I said, that's why this grade is probably not worth a ton, in all honesty, like I said, because it's very unlikely that he's going to necessarily be at this level, especially when he returns, which who even knows when he'll return at this point. I've heard some people say, oh, he'll be ready week 1, and I've heard other people say he's going to be on the physically unable to perform list, midway into next season. So when I say 85.54 first round, well, where do you take him then? That's tough to have to give a guy a redshirt year or even half a redshirt year in the most competitive league on planet Earth, essentially, right? Like, that's just tough to spend perhaps a first round pick or a top 20 pick, etc., on a guy that you can't really play. In terms of some other negatives here, very quickly, I had a couple bad drops at times. Lets the ball get into his body a little bit too much on occasion. Now, I would say on some of the other occasions, did a really good job stabbing his hands and plucking the ball out of nowhere. The rest of the time, when he did have some of those drops, just felt like he was maybe almost too relaxed with it, right? He thought he could flash his hands up probably a little bit later than he should have been, right? Maybe that was overconfidence. Maybe that was just not getting his head around quick enough. But it was something that I did note that led to a few drops. Another negative, which was kind of, at this point, it should be apparent after talking about his size, he's definitely not the strongest player. So he didn't have a ton of success across the middle, say, in terms of contested catches. Luckily for him, there weren't a lot of guys around him to contest, because he was just getting that open, right? So in that regard, even though it's a negative and something that I did dock him with on my grade, I gave him a 6.75 out of 10. But when you're getting that open as he was, you're very rarely going to have to deal with that. Otherwise, not a lot in terms of his blocking and physicality. I gave him a 2 out of 5 in that grade, and that might have been a little bit generous if we're being honest. And then the last negative I already talked about, which was minimal climbing of the ladder, right? So if you're one of these teams that just wants to throw jump balls and you want your first round wide receiver to be, snagging fades in the corner of the end zone, Jameson probably isn't your guy. But if you want somebody that's going to, have a visible effect on the defense every play just off of his speed alone, regardless of what he ends up running, a guy that can beat you with not only that athleticism, but also some really solid route running, at least prior to the injury, obviously, and a guy who's pretty dangerous as a rack threat as well. One thing that you saw a lot is Alabama just trying to get the ball in his hands no matter what it was. So not only were there a good bit of bubble screens, but there was also, a lot of motion in the backfield, some jet sweeps, things of that nature. Just anything to get the ball in Mr. Williams' hands they were doing. And I think that as long as he does recover from his injury to the fullest extent, that is something, no matter who drafts him, that I expect to continue at the next level. Maybe not right away, but, looking into 2023, 2024, etc., once he is hopefully fully healed, I would look for him to be one of the better Swiss Army knives that the league has to offer. Like I said, just get the ball in his hands and let him roam. And there's so many ways and places and areas on the field where he can get the ball in his hands, no problem. So as long as he's good medically, shouldn't be a problem physically on the field in terms of being able to translate a lot of that success that he had in college to the NFL. So with that being said, if you thought this video was a success, you enjoyed the discussion, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Because for today, I'm mic'd up, now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys. See you next video.